Welcome to the From Harm to Healing podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jones, and I'm a therapist who runs the From Harm to Healing treatment program, an online program for men who have engaged in infidelity or compulsive sexual behaviors within the context of an intimate relationship. I started this podcast to illuminate some of the common blind spots within the treatment fields for compulsive sexual behavior or sex addiction through the lens of the deceptive sexuality trauma model. I hope you find this resource enlightening, particularly if you're somebody navigating the pain of betrayal and deception for yourself. Thank you for listening to the From Harm to Healing podcast. Having recently sat down with Dr. Minwalla to go through the 3 I's of integrity, intimacy, and integration, we decided to continue with these conversations and cover some other topics. And the next one we've discussed more is healthy masculinity, and how that perhaps links to those 3 I's we've already talked about. And in this episode today, I'm bringing you the first part of that conversation. I'm welcoming Dr. Omar Minwalla back to the podcast today. And again, it's a privilege for me to be able to sit with you and have these conversations, which I think are so enriching in so many different ways. And we recently had some very helpful conversations about this concept of the 3 I's of integrity, intimacy, and integration. And one of the things that came up a lot in those conversations was the gender piece, the masculine gender shaping that is so important in your model. And so today, the hope is that we can develop that point a little bit further. So taking some of what we already spoke about, but really going into a bit more depth on the masculinity piece that is so important in this work.
I'm really happy to be here. I have my coffee, right? I'm calling these sessions, these discussions, Coffee with Chris and Dr. Minwalla. So going to be talking about masculinity, the 3 I's. How did the 3 I's get to the 3 intentional frequencies of healthy masculinity? So all of that has to do with the topic of the secret sexual basement, which is a type of abuse, victim trauma reality. So to stay true to our model, and for me to model how to do this, right, even on a podcast, before we attend to this subject matter, let's get out of ordinary space. Let's shift our brain into a more conscious, deliberate, focused, intentional space. And then we'll have a great conversation. So, Chris, you ready?
Absolutely.
On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Inhale. And exhale. Extraordinary, by the way. Adequate safety, humility. We're not here to fix it. We're here to learn, metabolize, heal. And truth, being honest. What I define as IAR, intentionally accurate, authentic reality. IAR, the opposite of IMR, intentionally manipulated reality. So when we shift into extraordinary space, it just simply means taking your attention and intention and really focusing on those 3 vibrations: adequate safety, humility, and IAR, truth. And when you create those conditions, those are the optimal conditions to engage the topic of abuse victim trauma, any kind of abuse victim trauma. It's much more optimal for the brain, for the person, the psyche, to be under these extraordinary conditions of safety, truth, and humility. So that's why I like to start, whenever I educate, I like to educate in extraordinary space. Yeah.
Well, now that we're in that extraordinary space where those conditions are present, we can open up this, again, really big, important topic of masculinity and take that conversation a little bit further. And so we talked about this idea of the shaping that occurs, the proscripts and prescripts of masculinity. And within your training and within your Be a Better Man program, One of the ideas we use is the man box, this metaphor of the man box. This is the box that men need to fit in. This is the prescribed vision of masculinity, if you like. Some of those things are obviously extremely unhealthy. And that man box idea came from this Tony Porter video, which again, you include in the training, in your programs. So I think that would be a really great place for us to start today.
Yes, because I think it's important, the Tony Porter video on male socialization, a big part of my work, because it's such a great way to illustrate. We might not think about it, but wow, we're all shaped with these proscripts and prescripts in really unhealthy ways. And then look at the outcomes, and he really shows us some of the unhealthy outcomes in that video. And so that's a big part of my work. And it's such a great metaphor, the man box and being trapped in it. What's trapping us in? What shapes the box? It is literally the prescripts and proscripts. And then how do you get out of the box? And what's the direction? And what are the healthy ways to think about masculinity? There's a real void there in society and in our thinking, partly because we're so preoccupied with the toxic outcomes. I mean, we're just dealing with the toxic outcomes. So there's not a lot of room really to start envisioning a new masculinity when you're being so burdened by it and hurt by it in the moment. However, that's really honest, loving, and whole is like, okay, we're busting out of this man box. And these are the three healthy directions. No one's forcing those. Those are paths to be on and chosen. And they're not a shape. It's an open territory now, gender. It's an open territory. It's not a shape anymore. And people get to find their own configuration and journey and define masculinity for themselves. And that's a big part of healing right there is, hey, you know what? You don't have to listen to these prescriptions and things you're allowed to do or not allowed to do based on gender. You can rewrite them. That's empowerment. You get to rewrite the scripts. Here and now, you get to rewrite, redefine what is masculinity to you. What is masculinity to you is going to be defined very differently and experienced differently from the next person. And so we're all now on a conscious journey of redefining, reconstructing. And that's exactly the Tony Porter video. I think he even says, we really got to get on the business of redefining, reconstructing what it means to be a man. So this is my contribution, and it comes from the three I's, right? For years, really developing integrity, intimacy, and integration as the three main problems for guys who have secret sexual basements in lives, and the three main solutions. And then years later, literally years later, as I'm really deeply thinking about masculinity and gender shaping, and in my iceberg diagram, level 5 is complex gender shaping. And the definition of complex gender shaping is patterns of harm over time where the victim can't escape. Male socialization, the man box, is a perfect example of patterns of harm over time, right? These proscriptions and prescriptions. If you're a boy, you're going to be thrown into the socialization meat grinder. I call it the gender meat grinder. And you have no choice. So these are patterns of harm: male socialization, gender socialization, and sexual socialization. All of that are heavily influenced by society prescripts and proscripts. And those prescripts and proscripts, so unhealthy, so toxic, so outdated, so dangerous, and really need to be revamped, right? We have many versions of the iPhone 15, iPhone 12. What about gender and sex revamps and evolution over time? And that's not happening. And so that's a big problem. And so years and years of thinking, how are men shaped to not have feelings, right? A lot of the unhealthy outcomes of this shaping in my model is the inability to process feelings, the inability to really comfort themselves or other people. In terms of their thought system, we're groomed as men to not think about our power and privilege or the basement as abuse. It's all, we have the luxury to go unexamined and not think about those things. Like we talked about last time, there's a real lack of relationship with the self. There's an inability to use the voice. In fact, masculinity prescript is choose violence over voice instead of voice over violence. That's a huge example of flipping the script right there. Is, okay, there's this prescript, choose violence over voice in masculine socialization. Let's flip it, voice over violence. Keep it upstairs, no more basements, right? So there's all these unhealthy outcomes. And after years of really describing what I just described, right? Complex trauma, shaping gender with these toxic outcomes, including the basement, heavily driven by male sexual entitlement and the lack of the A word. And sometimes when you think about something, at least in my journey, my career, it's often years of metabolizing and thinking and experiencing and metabolizing different concepts. And then all of a sudden, something will drop in and I'll really feel like, okay, that's it. That's something that's kind of a byproduct here that can grow into something. Like the secret sexual basement metaphor that just dropped in one day. Boom, secret sexual basement. After years of saying DCSR, DCSR, people didn't understand DCSR as much. Secret sexual basement, right? Same with the 3 eyes. Those came in a long time ago, the 3 eyes. And even then I knew these 3 words, not just for guys in recovery, these 3 words are for humanity. These 3 paths, all humans are moving towards integrity, intimacy with themselves, and integration, right? So I've been using the 3 eyes, these 3 sutras for a long time. And then boom, one day it was like, the 3 intentional vibrations, the 3 intentional frequencies, conscious frequencies of healthy masculinity, mature masculinity. How would I start to define that? Would be really derived from the 3 eyes, right? Integrity becomes honest. Intimacy with the self becomes loving. And integration becomes whole. And so the way I phrase it is, hey, what's the definition, Minwalla, of healthy masculinity? What if we were going to rewrite the scripts and you were going to write some prescriptions for us? What would you write? Well, Dr. Minwalla would write, what is healthy masculinity? It's a guy who's honest, loving, and whole. Honest, loving, and whole. Honest for sure with himself, about himself. It's not easy to be honest with yourself, including your sexuality sometimes. So being honest with all of you and being on the journey of discovering yourself, honestly meeting yourself, and then learning how to love yourself. And so honest, loving has ing at the end, intentionally. It's a verb, it's a vibration, it's vibrating in a human being. The energy of love vibrates in a human being. How are you going to be a parent if you aren't vibrating that vibration of love? That's what an infant needs first and foremost, is that vibration, right? So how can you be a parent? And yet the man box bleeds that right out of guys. The value of being loving, investing in how to being loving. Loving is girly. Loving is diminished. Loving is not valued in masculine socialization at all. And so the most essential vibration of being human and humanizing yourself and of being a parent is missing in male socialization, the simple frequency of love. So we're putting that right back in the center, and it's in the center for a reason. Honesty is on one side, whole is on one side, loving is in the center. It's the essential vibration of healthy masculinity. Loving, it's a verb, ing, honest, loving, and whole, right? A lot of people feel, how do I be healthy in the world? How do I navigate life? I'll just pretend to be all light and deny my shadow. And Carl Jung talks a lot about the shadow. The shadow has in it a lot of the things about ourselves that we don't want to admit. And then as life goes on, the ugly things about ourselves reveal themselves sometimes. And then we have a choice. Do we integrate that? Do we integrate the shadow, good, bad, or ugly, and become more whole? Or do we push it away, fragment, deny, and walk around like that's not part of us? So integration is about being whole. Good, bad, or ugly, it's about integrating shadow integration as a healthy way to stabilize the ego. A consolidated ego is a strong ego. A fragmented ego is very vulnerable. If you're not owning your shadow, you're vulnerable to projecting it on others and attacking them for parts of yourself that you don't like and you're not owning. So it's actually a vulnerable, dangerous psychological position to not know how to integrate your shadow. So honest, loving, and whole. These are the three masculinity prescripts. And it just gives direction, right? We're not reshaping gender into another contorted shape and everybody needs to contort themselves into it. We're breaking down the man box. Those boundaries and constrictions are gone. Now it's freedom. It's freedom. You get to reconstruct masculinity. You get to define. And if you talk to men and you ask them, moving forward, how can you redefine? How can you rewrite these scripts, right? Somehow you learned, I'm not supposed to have feelings. Feelings are degrading. Rewrite it. Feelings are important. Feelings are like FedEx packages being delivered. Are you going to open the package and put your emotion under the microscope and look down with curiosity and compassion? That's how you deal with feelings. So we can rewrite the scripts, and that's a form of empowerment and getting out of the man box and undoing these healthy, toxic ways of thinking. No, cheating is abuse. It's not a joke, not a things that all guys do. And, we can rewrite these prescripts and proscripts, especially around toxic masculinity. They're pretty obvious, right? And wholeness also really means not objectifying the self. That's part of loving the self. Because we're socialized as boys and men to not have feelings, we actually are groomed to objectify ourselves and take away our own humanity by taking away our feelings. If you can't share your feelings, you can't be honest. So now honesty's gone from us. We're literally groomed to choose violence over voice. And then what's the meaning of life going to be? And how's it going to feel for us? It's going to feel very lonely and very dark if you're engaging in a lot of violence. That's going to create a very deep sense of pain. So that's kind of how the three frequencies of healthy masculinity, mature masculinity evolved. And actually this masculinity piece is where a lot of my current energy is doing the Be a Better Man program. And it expands beyond just infidelity, sex addiction, secret sexual basement. It really expands into these broader concepts. How do I be become more honest, loving, and whole? What does that really mean? How can I move in that direction? How can I feel empowered not to be burdened with these toxic scripts that I was socialized into and I didn't have a choice? How can I mutate myself, right? Because I call the gender socialization process, it's throwing people into the meat grinder. It's a form of gender mutation. And so the unhealthy outcomes, we're all gender mutants. We've all been shaped in really toxic, unhealthy ways in terms of gender. So in that sense, we're all gender mutants. And how do you unmutate yourself? Well, you find out where the unhealthy mutations were and reshape yourself now moving forward. So that's a big part of recovery. That's a big part of treatment. It's more than just a sex plan and not engaging in sexual behaviors. It's a real vision of what is healthy masculinity from a very empowering place of freedom, of really thinking now how to rewrite these scripts and where your individual problems are. And then supporting each other as men and building a culture of consciousness around rewriting scripts and getting out of the man box and getting out of toxicity. Doing it together is where the power is. Having it reinforced, having a culture where there's sexual ethics and values and standards that are conscious and cultivated by men for themselves.
There was something really interesting you said there that jumped out at me, where we're talking about this man box and being shaped into that box, being forced into that box, but that this new sort of vision you're trying to paint for us isn't just contorting in a different way. So it's not saying that was wrong over there because it forced you into this box, so here's this new box to fit in. And that's one of the things I see sometimes in my work when we're breaking this down for people. They're wanting a sort of vision or a fixed vision or guidance on what does the healthy masculinity look like then. So I know unhealthy masculinity now, but tell me what I need to do to be a healthy man. And it feels like what you're saying here is not so much, so here's the new script of exactly how you have to be as a man, which is contorting into a new shape. It's more like, no, this is the foundation. These are the principles, the vibrations or frequencies, you use that word, that you can use as a new foundation for masculinity.
It sounds like what you were just saying is there's men who see this unhealthy shaping, right? Like the Tony Porter video, the man box. And then what you just shared, Chris, was it seems like some of the men, their response is, okay, tell us what's healthy. And we'll just reconstruct in the exact configuration of what's healthy. And that's different, than what I'm saying here, because we're deconstructing the man box. These are proscripts and prescripts. These are things you're supposed to be. You have to do this if you're a guy. You're not allowed to do this. You must be like this. You can't be like this. And so we're busting it all down and saying, no, we're not accepting that shaping, actually. I'm going to define masculinity. And obviously, whoever wrote these scripts, it's not good. It's like, these are really not good scripts. Like, whoever wrote them, however they developed, I don't know. That's probably a very long human story, but they really need to be rewritten. And so why wait for some authority from the outside of you? Why wait for society to dictate and mandate how you're going to be shaped in terms of gender? That already is a sign of being shaped to see gender as something outside yourself and a prescript that you need to follow. That's already part of the unhealthy thinking. And so we're completely busting free from all of that, right? There's an internal human being. What is masculinity, femininity, being? What does gender mean to them? And how can they now feel free to express that without boxes and mandates and shaping that are really unhealthy? Honest, loving, and whole there's a lot of freedom in that. It's not creating another shape. Think of a box that just got busted open and now is flat on the ground, and now it's just an open territory. Everyone can walk out in different directions and start defining for themselves in an empowering way, what does masculinity mean to me? And you might have one guy walking in this direction, which is a beautiful path for him to walk. And you have another human being walking in this direction, which is a beautiful path for him to walk. And they're defining masculinity based on their own lives, their own wounds, and what they need, and what makes sense for them. There is no such thing as the same definition of healthy masculinity. But for all humans, there's some basic frequencies that are undeniably healthy: honesty, loving, wholeness, being whole. These are all really human frequencies. And they're so core that, of course, that's going to be part of the triadic core, are these human frequencies, right? People being able to be honest about their gender and triadic core, loving towards that part of themselves, and integrating that part of themselves, right? So a huge amount of freedom, major shift in how we think. When you say, I'm working with men and they have this man box and these unhealthy definitions, and they want to run to they're like, tell me what the new definitions are. And now we're going to do that. And it's just looking for another shape, looking for another external authority, looking for ultimately the healthy father to teach us what is healthy masculinity, right? So there's this deep father hunger of, tell us what to do. Give us the scripts. Give us the other shape. Let us obey. We'll just obey differently now. And it's a busting out of that. None of that applies. It's starting all over again from scratch. If you have such unhealthy prescriptions, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to be whole. You have to choose violence over voice and hurt people just to gain masculinity status. These are so unhealthy psychologically. These are so unhealthy. So rewriting them is very, very powerful and is a big part of liberating us from these really toxic scripts.
I love that image of the box breaking down, collapsing on the floor, because it links to, you mentioned the man box. And then I'm thinking back to our previous conversation when we talked about intimacy, or we're talking about loving today, to the self, intimacy with the self. You talked about picking up the phone and checking in with the self. So there's your answer in a way. You're saying, like, with the triadic core, with whatever our own individual version of that is going to be, the way we do that is standing on honest, loving, whole as those basic frequencies, foundational frequencies, and really just checking in with the self. And that's where we're going to find our answers. And it sounds like that's not easy work. That's not quick work, but that's what I'm understanding from what you're saying. We're going to find the answers within ourselves when we can look at it authentically.
Get to know yourself deeply and honor that part of you, right? And be honest with that part of you, loving towards that part of you, and integrate that part of you. So we're literally going back to 101, starting all from scratch now. We forget all of these unhealthy scripts. We're going to start basic with just gender, sex 101 and rewrite scripts from scratch and start over. If there were pretty good scripts, then hey, we could, keep some of them. Let's just edit. No, we just done with that. We need a blank piece of paper, please. And guys, if you want some direction on which way to go, honest, loving, and whole. That's how you move towards healthy masculinity. Honest, loving, and whole. I guarantee that will lead to a healthier human being and healthier masculinity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the From Harm to Healing podcast. If you'd like to find out more information about the deceptive sexuality trauma model itself, you can visit minwallamodel.com. If you're interested in the services that I offer, in particular the From Harm to Healing treatment program, please visit chrisjonestherapy.co.uk.